So we're continuing our series on Say What? That's not in the Bible at all there. And today's phrase is God helps those who help themselves. Okay, all right. So when have you heard this phrase being used? Like when is it usually? It's usually like when we really want something, right? Like I really want a boat. I don't know if a boat is it, but it's like God helps those who help themselves. Or we really want a promotion at work. God helps those who help themselves. So we begin to work even more, right? Or maybe you want to start a business or a nonprofit, something that's good. And we're doing this for the Lord, right? And we kind of like, I'm just going to pour into this. After all, God helps those who help themselves. It's kind of like when we want something, or even we say it when our life is just a complete mess. And we completely blame ourselves for the mess that we're in. And we're like, I just got to dig myself out of this. After all, God helps those who help themselves. Right? And we're like, say what? What? I mean, is that really what we think? So where did this phrase come from? There's a couple of interesting origin stories. One of them is actually Ben Franklin, that when he was trying to rally everyone to fight the British and fight England and rally everyone around freedom, he ends up quoting an old Greek proverb that says, God helps those who help themselves. And you think about it, and it actually kind of makes sense. Like he's trying to rally all these people around there, but you got to understand what Ben Franklin actually believed. I think sometimes we put our beliefs onto people in the past. Well, Ben Franklin was actually a deist, and what deists believe is that God kind of stirred the pot, got everything going in creation, and then backed up and is millions of miles away just watching. And he's fundamentally outside of creation. This is what Ben Franklin believed. It makes sense that he would say, God helps those who help themselves. That makes sense when you believe that God is fundamentally outside of it. But I have a different read of Scripture in the Bible. I see in the Bible a God who is always near. I mean, Jesus is called Emmanuel, that God is with us, that he is always near us. He was walking with God's people in the wilderness outside of Pharaoh, that he was at the burning bush with Abraham, that God is with us constantly, even when God's people are messing up. He is with them and guiding them. So it's not about them doing the best they can, that God is always there even when we mess up. Right now, look at our Old Testament reading with Abram and Sarai. God has called them to be this great nation, right? Abram is going to be this father, and yet they don't have any kids. But we're right at the beginning of all of that. We're right at the beginning, and Abram kind of finds his way into Egypt, which is kind of a call forward a couple times in this. In fact, can you tell all the call forwards in this? It happened with Egypt later in this little story. But continuing on with the story, Abram goes there and he sees his wife is beautiful, and he's worried. He's worried. He's like, man, God has made this amazing promise to us, but we're going to go into Egypt and Pharaoh's going to see how beautiful my wife is, and he's just going to kill me. And it's going to end God's promise. So God would want me to be clever and to see a special way kind of through this situation, right? After all, God helps those who help themselves. So he goes up to his wife, is like, hey, honey, you need to pretend like you're my sister. Can you do that for me? Because I think they're going to kill me. And what ends up happening? All these plagues end up coming on to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh's like, what are you doing to me, man? Why didn't you tell me that she was your sister? This could have saved us all kinds of problems. And all this stuff happens because Abraham was trying to help himself. And I think we understand this really well. I think we get it, because oftentimes when we're up against a wall, we're like, I got to hustle hard to make this all go away. I got to do all this. Listen, I did that. I mean, I barely slept for the first month of this whole thing because I was like, we got to change how we're doing all this. I'm not saying that was the most healthy approach. I'm just saying it's what I did because I get in there that, that we needed to hustle more. And things were new and we had to do that a little bit, but it doesn't need to be the core of us. Our core needs to be resting in Jesus. And I see this, God helps those who help themselves, not explicitly taught in churches, but a variation taught all the time. And it's where it's this theology that says that God will meet you halfway, or that you need to at least turn towards him and start walking towards him and get to some predetermined godly spot, and then God will swoop in and make all things better, right? Like that it takes that turning around and getting there, and I'm just discontent. And I hope that you can see what I'm saying here. That when we say that God helps those that helps themselves, we're basically saying that you have to do it. You got to make this happen. You got to see this through. And it puts all the pressure on us. And during the pandemic, I think we see this all the time, that we've got to figure out the pandemic, the best way to get through it. And we look at other people on Facebook or on the news and we're like, oh, they're doing the pandemic wrong. They're doing all this wrong. They need to be doing this or that or over there. And we get real judgy and they're like, man, they just need to get out there and make things happen. And we do that and we're constantly focused on that. And it can be so overwhelming for us. And it's the exact opposite of rest in knowing that God has you and that God is with us. And that gets us to a question here at this point in the sermon. Do we believe in a God that is always there, that he is Emmanuel, that he's our ever-present help in a time of trouble, that he is as near to us as the breath, as the pneuma, as the spirit in our lungs? Or do we believe something kind of like Ben Franklin, where God started this whole thing and he is distant and doesn't play any part in it now? And when we look in the scriptures, we see story after story where people are like, I need to start this up and help God. Like it's a bunch of stories. Abraham that we talk about. And I think especially the story of Paul, we see that. Like Paul was this Pharisee of Pharisees is how he describes himself. And one of the things he does is he's taking this job of helping God so seriously that he is willing to break every single commandment while he's helping them. Like Paul was zealous after serving God in his own way, right? And he was murdering all these Christians, breaking all these commandments. And the only thing that really stopped Paul was a literal come to Jesus experience on the road to Damascus, where Jesus comes to him, and that changes Paul forever. Because I think after that point, I think Paul sees the futility in zealousness there, in going his own way and needing to start things up and get things going for God, right? Like all those things. And he finds that God is an ever-present help and comfort in his time of need. And in that moment put Paul on an interesting journey. Like we see that his missionary journeys are all over the creation, all over Europe and like all in Asia and all those things. And we look at it like, my goodness, that's amazing. Like Paul must have been a freight train of Jesus conversions, right? And I don't know if that's the case, because when you look at his life, it talks about him coming into a town and setting up a tent making shop. Like setting up a tent making shop, like that doesn't sound like a freight train of conversions. That doesn't sound like somebody coming in with a big Barnum and Bailey style tent and putting hands on people's foreheads and going, be healed, now go, type of thing. Like that sounds like he was like coming into the community and kind of being part of it. And then we also see how he ended up in prison a few times. And I think, well, at least how I used to think was, man, well, Paul spending in prison, that must have been a terrible, 23 days on him. Well, we know that's not the case. We know that he spent years in prison. He spent years there. And I think this new Paul that we see is that he knows that he is one that is following God no matter where God leads him. And this Paul, he's sitting in prison for years, and from prison he writes this letter to the Philippians. This is from Philippians chapter 4, beginning with the 11th verse. Not that I am speaking of being in need, for I have learned that in whatever situation I am to be content. I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. He doesn't say God helps those who help themselves. Let's figure this out real quick. No, he says that in whatever situation he faces now, he can be content because he has a Savior that gives him strength in all those little situations. He says that God is his strength. So he can sit in prison, or he can sit and make tents in the city, or he can start all these churches around his area, or he can even be shipwrecked because he knows that everything will be fine for him. Because he can do all things, whether big things or small things, whether inconsequential things or no things. He can do all things through Christ who strengthens him. So whether the situation is good or bad, he can be content in everything he does because Jesus went to the cross for him. I think it's funny how we treat like this Jesus on the cross sometimes. We don't overtly say this, but it's almost like we say that Jesus is on the cross and he's saying to us, oh, I did this so that you can try your best. It's like, I'll only join you when you come my way. Like, no, we know what he says on the cross. He says, it is finished. He serves us. He serves you. And he forgives you of your sins. And he's done everything for you so that you can rest in him. So what does this look like today? We're in odd times right now. Well, I think Paul writes down something interesting. So we just read that one part of Philippians, and right at the end, there's a section of that kind of hit me like a ton of bricks this week. It ends with, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. But the verse right after it says this, yet it was kind of you to share in my trouble. And I remember looking at that verse this week, and I was like, oh my goodness. What is this? It was kind of you to share in my trouble? And I was thinking about putting it with him, Paul seeing the strength of Christ, and he's looking back at the times in his life when he saw God the most, when he saw the strength of God, and he tells this small little church in Philippi that it was their love shown to him, even in his moment of weakness, that showed him the strength of God the most. And that's incredible. That's incredible. So I think the way this looks like today is simply us showing love to people. So I think many of us right now, we're faced with a pandemic all around, and we hear on the news and we're like, say what? What are these people doing? What are these officials saying and all these things? We say what? And us personally, we're trying to win quarantine, right? We're like, I'm going to do this and then this. We have our plan, and after all, God helps those who help themselves, right? And all those things. But I think all that makes sense if we believe the same God of Ben Franklin, the God who is very distant, but we see a God who comes near, a God who loves us, a God who sent his Spirit onto all of us, that sends his Spirit of love out into the creation. So what can you do to show this love? While we're sitting in our homes and all of that, I think we can call people. Just call up your friends and just chat for a while. We can do Zoom calls or FaceTime or whatever like that. We can go to the end of our driveways and socially distance, have a conversation there. We can send notes in the mail, however you want. But we can show love just like that Philippians church showed the strength of God by their love for Paul, even in his weakness. And I think that's beautiful, because that's happened to me a lot too. So I hope that you continue to have patience during this rough time and know that our God is the God of Elohim, of God with us, that is always coming and strengthening us. Have peace.